So, Tom Clancy's The Division 2's release is right around the corner. I had a chance to play a little bit of the open beta after playing very little of the first Division. I have to say, I kinda like the game. The gunplay, the cover system, the cool loot, and even some of the cinematics make the chance of me getting the game possible. The game also has some downsides or a few bugs that I think should be talked about. Here are a few of my impressions on the Division 2's open beta. So the first thing that caught my attention wasn't the beta or its functions. It wasn't the gameplay, the cinematics, or the guns. The first thing I noticed right off the bat was the disclaimer. It's broken up into a couple parts. The first portion lets you know that the beta is only a small slice of the game, but you can play the beta for as long as you want before the beta ends. This includes a few main missions, side missions, and PvP. Ubisoft wants you to try out the game and give them some feedback on the experience. All that seems very positive to me. The part that made me concerned is the fact that you can't create a character, one is randomly generated for you. Did they not want the feedback on the functions or options of the character creation? Would it take up too much space or add to some of the character creation options in? There's also a bit where they mention that the game is still in active development, and because of the pre-release status of the game, quote, Ubisoft cannot commit to providing any customer support for the duration of the open beta. If any of you watched my video on Black Desert Online, the exact opposite was said in the first note of the game. Customer support was offered in full character creation with all characters that were released in the full game were available. I don't like this out that companies keep using with their games so close to launch. Is the issue that since release is only a couple of weeks away, any real improvements just cannot be acknowledged without a drop in sales? I hope that the character creation options are plentiful and satisfying, but as of now I'll remain skeptical until the full game's release. I was pretty bummed out about not being able to actually customize a character. Also, the body types option only changed the character from male to female, so I think the only variation in build is sex. Aside from that, as soon as the game starts, I realized I really like the look of the game. It's not particularly graphically impressive, but it has an aesthetic that I think is unique to the game. It's very Last of Us meets Ghost Recon. From the menus to the clothing to the gritty but interesting world, I can't help but look at it a little bit with awe. Again, it's not over the top beautiful, but it does have an interesting look in my opinion. The bases and missions also feel like you're walking into a movie scene. Bunsen burners for drug labs, smoke coming out of open manhole covers to the subway, and this weird green smoke and water everywhere from what I'm guessing is spray cans sets the ambiance for what at least looks like an interesting world. When starting the beta and entering the first base area, I noticed that this world feels alive. The settlers in the first base have guards, medics, people who deal with comms, and major quest givers that have their own cutscenes when interacting with the player character. A lot of the people you interact with or even stand around will be talking to each other and making calls in what feels like an organic way. You can even meet NPCs out in the world that are fighting with local gangs or scavenging for materials. I even managed to run into some animals on my way to other quests, like a deer or even a stray dog. I enjoyed these initial interactions, but I wasn't really able to interact further. When an NPC is stuck in a gunfight or being attacked with someone by a melee weapon, I could step in and take out the bad guys with zero acknowledgement from the survivor. At least a thank you or even a hello would have been nice. Maybe they could have even given some ammo or a tip on where you could find decent loot for the trouble of stopping by to help these people. It's not a big issue and more about immersion than anything else. It just seems like a little strange that someone wouldn't be grateful that you just saved their life. The shooting and cover system mechanics feel good. When moving between cover positions, there is a command prompt to move to a location and even arrows to show you where you could move around something. I like how fluid the cover system felt and how realistic the enemy movements were. Enemies didn't feel robotic in their movements and actually talked to each other to strategize their attacks against you. They'll tell each other to move or get out of the way when you're about to flank them or start to attack them. The shooting system isn't bad either, but after playing so many shooters, I don't know how I feel about the bullet sponge idea. For instance, most of the enemies I ran to went down pretty easily, but I'm wondering if it will take several magazines to kill enemies in later levels. I'm not talking about the heavily armored tank-like enemies, I mean the run-of-the-mill bad guys. This is just me speculating as I haven't played the first Division into the higher levels, but I'm hoping that every enemy won't eventually take a long time to kill. There were a few moments during the gunfights that I got into where the sound would start to distort a little bit. The gunfire started to sound a little hazy and would even make the shooting noises when it wasn't firing my gun. It wasn't the worst bug, and it never persisted more than a few seconds, so I'm not particularly worried about it. There was, however, a few moments where I thought my game would crash when the game froze for about 5 seconds. This happened when there was a big explosion or a lot happening on screen. One moment in particular was towards the end of the hotel mission where you're fighting on the roof to rescue Eleanor. Once a few of the bad guys are killed, a very tanky enemy appears with a heavy machine gun and lots of armor. It may have been that the explosion plus the spawning in of the enemy was a lot for the game to take, but the good news is that it didn't disconnect me. Once the initial animation was done, the game continued to run smoothly until mission completion. So those were some of my impressions on The Division 2's open beta. I know it seemed like I was giving this game nothing but praise, but I actually enjoyed the little bit of time that I got to play the game. It looks good and feels good, but the real test will be to see if the game is enjoyable after the first few missions. Not to mention, I didn't even get into the most of the content that people will be playing when the game releases, which is co-op and PvP. I wish I could have shown a little bit of that, unfortunately I just didn't have the time to get into it. If I were to base my decision on whether or not to get the game from this beta, I'm really not sure. The issue is that even though the acting, action, and aesthetic is good, I don't know that the story is all that compelling. I honestly couldn't even tell you what the story is actually about. I know the focus of the game is supposed to be about gear, so maybe that's enough to carry the game without an amazing story. I also don't know the extent of the character creation since we weren't even given an option to really create one. Can I even create an avatar that I'm willing to invest this much time into? Those things and the missing experience of the multiplayer make me skeptical enough to not buy the game outright, but I'm definitely willing to change my mind after a few bits of the game that I did play, and after more of the game is fleshed out. Anyway, if you guys enjoyed the video or thought it was helpful, please like and subscribe. Thanks guys. Bye.